Hello my amazing tarot friends, it's Justin Michael. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome if this is your first time stopping by. I appreciate you as always. I want to have a little ramble on Tarot de Marseille. I specifically want to talk about the Mass Market Tarot de Marseille decks in my collection, and why I think they're important. I'm going to name about 10 or 11 decks that I just could never part with, that are just extremely important, both to me personally in my collection, but also historically, I think. And I want to start off with the deck that is probably the most important in my opinion, which is the Grimaud Tarot. This is the current version, which is available today, still through Grimaud. But it's very important because it's sort of what put Tarot de Marseille back on the map in the modern era. So what do I mean by mass market decks? These are decks that were printed in the post-industrial era. So like the late 1800s until the Common Era, until today. So by major publishing companies, printed and sold to the masses. That's basically what, companies like Grimaud, US Games, Fournier, these are mass market companies. Now this deck, I believe, is very important. Well, there's multiple reasons. For one, it was designed, this specific deck was designed in 1930 by a guy named Paul Marteau. And so Paul Marteau, to give you sort of the short version, was one of the first historians, certainly, of Tarot de Marseille. In fact, he made the term Tarot de Marseille popular. He borrowed that phrase from a gentleman by the name of Romain Merlin, I believe, who said it in 1859. And they're referring to the specific pattern that we now know as the Tarot de Marseille. Before that, it was basically called the Jeu de Tarot, something like that, and then, Merlin and then Paul Marteau sort of expanded on that and said, no, the pattern that we, have sort of from, not limited to, but around the area of Marseille, France, although many Tarot de Marseilles were printed outside of even France. Some were printed in Italy, in Germany, in Switzerland, all over the place. But they called it the Tarot de Marseille. That's for better or worse, that's what we now know it as. And so Paul Marteau, he came up with this phrase, but he also sort of, reintroduced Tarot de Marseille to the masses, because he wrote this really great book, and I think it's just called the Tarot de Marseille, which was printed again in 1930, and he just did a lot of really great historic work for his time. That book was just translated into English recently. I don't own a copy of it, but I am told by a lot of people who really know what they're talking about that it's one of the great works in Marseille history, along with Stuart Kaplan and Michael Domet and all these great figures that made sense of the complex history of tarot, or at least helped. Anyway, so what Paul Marteau did was he borrowed from an earlier version. So Grimaud printed before that was a deck that was originally from 1748 by a guy named Arnault. And it was different colors, it was totally different. And so in the 1880s or so, a company called Lecourt, they resurrected this deck, this historic deck from 1748, and they printed it. That's known as the Lecourt Arnault, But in 1891, Grimaud purchased that company, and then they began to print the Arnault. This version here was done by Conrad Steyn, and this is a version that is from the that was printed by Grimaud. And the reason I know that, and I think I'm guessing correctly, and I could be wrong about this. That's why you always want to do your own research. But this is why I know. I think because the sword in the 7, 9, and 10, when it was printed by Lecourt, had was half covered in blood. When Grimaud took it over in 1891, they did away with that. So that's how I know that this was a Grimaud version. But it's basically the same otherwise. It was cleaned up a bit by Grimaud, and for whatever reasons they used, probably marketing and so forth, you know, they cleaned it up. So this deck, Paul Marteau, he basically, you know, he copied a lot from this and from the Conrad and the Piedmontese, basically, is where he borrowed from. And there are a few main differences between these decks, but I wanted to show you them together because they're both extremely important. And this is available, I believe, on Make Playing Cards, if I'm not mistaken. I will leave that link below, by Conrad Steyn. It's the only Arnault that I own. There are a few, the Big Cartel, I think, or one of those card companies does both the Grimaud and the Lecourt version, or the Cartomancer, or one of those companies. But as you can see, I mean, the line work is, you know, basically the same, or very, very similar. But the major difference is this is what's called the Besançon, which just means that it's replaced the Papess and the Pope with non-religious figures. Juno for the High Priestess, or the Papess, and then Jupiter for the Pope, which I'm going to show you in a second. So there's Jupiter. Now, in 1930, when Paul Marteau redesigned his deck and it was printed, the colors were famously much better. And that's actually a highly sought after deck, is the Grimaud 1930, because the colors are just so much nicer. And, you know, most people agree, because the printing technology was different. You know, it was a different type of printing, and only like the carnival colors were available when this was popular, you know. But it's an extremely important historic deck, and it's the deck that really reintroduced Tarot de Marseille to the public. You know, so now we live in an era where you know, all these great historic restorations are being made available by people like you know, Yves Arnault and Pablo Robledo, and all these great tarot figures, you know, who resurrect these decks and then put them in print. And that's really great, and that's where my focus has been recently for like the last few years. But it's nice to kind of go back to the mass markets and sort of remember, you know, their significance, and they're really great decks. I mean, you know, so it's, you know, you have all these fancy kind of historic recreations that are great, and I just love it. I mean, we live in a great renaissance of tarot, I always say it, and I think our best days are yet to come with the historic tarot. I really think the next 10 to 20 years is going to be great for historic decks. I'm not going to do the whole deck. I'm just going to show you some things, but they're mostly the same. You know, the colors are different. The line work is exactly the same. There's a few added things which I'll point out. Well, one in particular, I'm thinking on the world card is the most obvious to me, and that is the one of the angels in this deck has a beard, which is kind of cool, and it doesn't have it on the Grimaud. But you know, again, like, this is just a very, very historic deck, and there are small differences and so forth. Now, so yeah, this is the Grimaud, and so like I said, this is one of the most important historic decks in my opinion. So next I want to show you, which is in that sort of mode, is the Les Tarot de Marseille by Fournier. And this is basically the same kind of line work as that. In fact, I think it's exactly the same, if I'm not mistaken, or at least drawn from it. But this is by the Spanish company Fournier. So Fournier, it was basically, it's one of the older card companies, and I always forget his name, Herculeo Fournier. You know, mid 1800s, like 1860s, around the American Civil War, he founded this company, and I think he like teamed up with an art teacher or something. They came up with some cool decks and so forth. But what he did was he made a really innovative cardstock somewhere like 1890s, 1900, and won an award, and he became really, really well-known card maker, you know, and that's sort of what he's known for. But in the meantime, they printed some really great decks, especially in like the 80s, the 70s and 80s. I think this was published in 1983, but it's basically the same as the deck I just showed you, which is sort of like, you know, the cookie cutter kind of Tarot de Marseille of this period, you know. But it's fully colored. It's more richly painted, you know. It has a colored background, but it has all the symbolism that, you know, you would have in the Grimaud. And it's a really cute deck. I love it. It's still available today. It's not like this in the flip box anymore. It comes in the tuck box now. And the colors, I believe, in the vintage version are better. And I know everyone says that, but it's just true. And it's more drastic even in the deck I'm going to show you next. But this is just really, it's one of my favorites. I love Fournier for a lot of reasons, mostly because it's a small, nice, easy to handle deck. I just love the card stock, and you know, these are important historical decks in my opinion. So, and this is an absolute classic. So yep, that's the first Fournier deck I want to show you. The second one is actually one of my favorite decks of all time, and it's the Spanish Tarot de Marseille. So this has an interesting history. Very, very interesting. Again, it comes in this is the vintage version from the 80s, from the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. But it is still available today. And it comes in a box like this, in a tuck box. And basically the same, but the colors are just much better in the vintage version, particularly the skin tones. This deck is really, really unique, and it's important for a few reasons. Firstly, it's based on a deck that sometimes you'll hear referred to as the Liguria Piedmont deck. And this is a whole kind of can of worms. I don't know if I can get into the whole thing about Piedmontese Tarot. But Liguria Piedmontese was a standard Tarot de Marseille published in like 1736 in the Piedmont region. And so, you know, Fournier redid it. I forget the name of the artist. Yeah, I forget the name of the artist. But the person who redid it was, you know, recreating this historic tarot, which was basically, like I said, it's a historic deck. Well, the deck is based on the Ottone, the Giuseppe Ottone, which was printed in 1736 in the Piedmont region. And you know, it was redone and given Spanish titles and so forth. And it's known as the Spanish Tarot de Marseille. I know Stuart Kaplan did a version as well, and he was somehow involved in this. And it was printed through Fournier, but I think in 1975, U.S. Games had a version for a little bit, and it's super rare, but it is around. And I'd like to get a copy of that. I wouldn't pay too much money for it because it's probably basically the same deck. But and I'm very, very happy with this. These are the backs, by the way. And like I said, it's still available. Now, this is the Liguria Piedmont deck by Ottone. And this was a historic deck to some people. And there's several schools of thought on this. But, you know, Italy is thought to be the birthplace of tarot. You know, the Milanese pattern, you know, the tarot of Milano is supposed to be the cradle of like tarot history, right? But there were a couple of theories about the Piedmont region. So one was that tarot basically disappeared in northern Italy, and then it reappeared again later on, introduced by like the John de Dahl. And that's why people believe that, because a deck like this that came in 17... So the doll was printed in 1701. This came about in 1736. This was even before the Payen. But it's clearly influenced, in my opinion anyway. It looks very influenced by Jean de Dalle. And you get that from, especially from the Devil and the Hermit. Well, I'll get to the Devil in a second. That's a really great hangman, though. Okay, so yeah, you have like a very type 1 Devil. But, so this is what they believe. They believe that tarot disappeared in northern Italy, and then it was reintroduced by the French. So it went from Italian sort of tarot, the Italian tarot, and that's why Tarot de Marseille was printed in northern Italy after, because it was brought back by the French. There are several historic things that happened that, you know, reintroduced. I think maybe Napoleon had something to do with it, and there were some other things. No, it was before Napoleon, but you know, so that's what they believe. But I got to tell you, the other side of that is that they're starting to really think now, and you get into like the semantic debate, but you know, historians like Sherryl Smith, and I'll link her article below, she believes actually that you know, the Piedmontese tradition was unbroken. And I believe she talked about this a bit in the video I did with her. It's hard to remember the details. There's so much information, but basically, you know, the Piedmontese pattern of that time was just sort of influenced by the tradition that was always existed there, but it had some influences from France. I mean, because that's undeniable, you know, because but so for her, she doesn't consider this deck, I don't believe, and if she's watching, hopefully she'll correct me, but I don't believe she considers the Automne as a Piedmontese deck, because it doesn't fit in the criteria, even though it was made in Piedmont, or the Piedmont region. It's technically a standard Tarot de Marseille, according to her. Now, there are people who will disagree with this, and just like anything else, you always have varying opinions, and a lot of it's just semantics, you know. But so that's why at the time, I know Michael Dummett, who's like the chief historian in Tarot de Marseille. I don't know much about Dummett, you know. In fact, I might be talking above my pay grade here, but he believed that tarot died out in northern Italy and it was reintroduced by the French. And then this deck would have been one of the early decks that brought it to Piedmont. You know, I think I have that right. I could be wrong, but again, that's being challenged now because, you know, there's documents and evidence that suggest that, you know, tarot never left there. It just kind of reintroduced the same tradition, you know, but it was obviously influenced in some way by Tarot de Marseille. At least this deck was, because this is a standard Tarot de Marseille, but just happened to be from Piedmont, you know. I don't know. Again, I'm going to link that article by Sherryl Smith, but this is one of the great Marseille decks. I'm sorry if I went on and on about that, but I thought it was important to mention that, because you know, there's a lot about that is still sort of new to me, but also just not settled really, you know, for me, because I'm not convinced one way or the other. I don't really know enough about it, and I have to do more research. And if you are interested in it, you definitely want to do more research. So next on the list, I think I'm going to show you, let's see, Stuart Kaplan decks. So, because we mentioned Stuart Kaplan, and I want to show you his decks. So the first one I'm going to show you is the Tarot Classic. And the Tarot Classic is an absolute classic. It's one of my favorites. It really is. I love this. And it's based on another deck, the Fabrique something or other. I'm going to show you that in a second. But I love the colors in this. And there is a company now, the same company I mentioned, I think, who redid this deck. They're like redoing every single historic deck. They're a little bit pricey. I think the decks are like $60-something, and it's printed on standard cardstock, and that's why I don't own any of their decks, because I don't believe in spending $70 on a deck that's printed, you know, on standard make playing cards kind of paper. I just can't do it. You know, that's not a shot. It's just an opinion. You know, it's something I want to share on my channel. I mean, I just can't spend that kind of money on a deck if it's not worth it, in my opinion. So Schaffhaus Fabrik is the deck. Again, that was redone recently, but Stuart Kaplan is the absolute man. I mean, he is. There's so much that man did for tarot. And, you know, continued the work of Paul Marteau and beyond that. His encyclopedia is, I'm told by my tarot historian friends, it's like one of the, you know, great reference books, you know. And so I just, you know, and he just passed away recently, so, you know, I like to give him a lot of credit, because he really did so much for tarot. I love this deck. I love most of his decks, but this deck is great because it's in that very Swiss pattern. It's very much like the Gassman, you know, and but the colors are just really, really cool in this deck. Now, I think this was the deck that he said came from Burdell or something, or somebody said that somewhere, and that was just completely incorrect. You know, it was not the Burdell. I don't know if it was this deck or another deck, but I remember hearing that. But this is just one of my favorites. And again, it's a very small deck, like the Fournier. And very, very important deck to me. Again, I can never get rid of these. I mean, just great. Love that devil. And he did so many great decks, Stuart Kaplan, and I'm going to show you 3 of them that he did briefly. I'm not going to show you all the cards. Let me just show you some of the pips here. Very, very classic tarot, and just, you know, one of my favorite Marseilles of all time. It's a great deck. I'm happy I got this. I remember this was like one of the first vintage decks I bought. This was a vintage Tarot de Marseille that I wanted, and it was one of the first because I just fell in love with the colors. I remember seeing the prices were all over the place. Some of them were really expensive, and some of them were like reasonable, and that's why you always have to be patient when you want one of these historic mass market decks. Be patient for a while and keep an eye. Don't buy the first one you see, you know, because they're around. You just have to find them. So this is another one called, well, I probably should have showed you the other one first, but I'm going to show you this anyway. We have it. The Angel Tarot. I don't know too much about the history other than it was Tarot de Marseille became very popular in Japan at some point, and this is like a deck that was designed in Japan and brought back here by Stuart Kaplan, you know, redesigned or whatever. The Angel Tarot, it's called. I love his backs. I didn't show you the backs probably in the last deck, but very similar. The plaid backs. Yeah, I should have showed you that. It was important, but anyway. So what's cool about this deck, it was several things are really cool about it. Let me see. I did have it in order. Pages are a bit lost in here. Okay. What's nice about this deck is that, you know, people often complain that Tarot de Marseille isn't very diverse, doesn't have a lot of diversity. The reason that is obvious. I mean, you know, the images are going to reflect, they're historic decks from the 15th through 17th century. They're going to reflect the population of that time in that place, you know. Modern tarot decks, yeah, they should have diversity, but these are decks from a different era, very historic decks. And I just said, as I said that, the Black Power Tarot just fell off my sofa. I'm not even kidding you. That is so weird. Of all the decks, I have so many decks sitting there, the Black Power Tarot just got thrown off the couch. Very, very weird. Anyway, so this is one of the decks, I guess it wanted to be mentioned, you know, one of my favorite modern decks with diversity of Tarot de Marseille variety is the Black Power Tarot. It's absolutely amazing. So there's an honorable mention. But yeah, this is a Japanese style deck, you know, and they're clear. It's clearly like Japanese influence, and you know, it's just kind of cool, you know. So yeah, their faces are white, but it's a different culture, and the characters look Japanese to me. So. But I love this, and there's a lot of reasons I love it. The artwork is great, but one of my favorite things is that it has playing card symbols in the deck throughout, you know. That's a really interesting devil. Okay, so let me show you some of the pips, because these are some of my favorite pips in a deck. I just love the way they look. But as you can see, you know, you have, for instance, the club symbol is in there, you know. So that's for the wands. And on the court cards, you have, like, for instance, the suit. The element of earth, you have diamonds for the pentacles. So it's like a little bit of a hybrid deck, you know. And I'm not sure why Stuart Kaplan did that, except that maybe in Japan they, you know, recognized the suits, the old French suits. I don't know. I don't know why he chose to do that. But with Stuart Kaplan, there was probably a reason that he did it. But this is just a beautiful deck, and I'm so glad I got this. This was actually pretty recent. I got this year sometime, and I'm so glad I did, because it's just a great historic deck. The other Stuart Kaplan deck I'm going to show you, it's very, very arguable that this is not even a Tarot de Marseille, but I want to mention it because it was such a popular deck, and it's one that many people started with and so forth, but it's the JJ Swiss, the one JJ Swiss. It's technically a Besançon, but it's not in the same historic pattern, you know. It's very, actually, you know, to me, this looks more Italian than French. Like, the artwork looks like an Italian deck to me, but it's in like sort of a French style, and it's a Besançon. The reason it's a Besançon is because even the cups and all, they look very, very Italian to me, like northern Italy almost, like the Tower of Lombardy. Hold on, let me show you here. Okay, so here we have the Hangman. You know, you can see it's very, very, it doesn't have that wood block kind of look. Not in the same way, anyway. And then here we have Juno for the Papess. Jupiter, you know. Tower. So it's, you know, I wanted to give it an honorable mention. I don't know if it fits in exactly. I know some of the cards are upside down there. I apologize for that. But, you know, this is basically just an honorable mention. And Stuart Kaplan is just, he is a tarot hero, in my opinion. He's one of my tarot heroes. And he just has really helped to make tarot like what it is today. So, in that respect, I think I'm going to go, okay, I'm going to show you the Piatnik deck, because we're talking about the 80s. This was a deck that was printed in the 80s. This is by Piatnik. And it's often referred to as Tarot Renan or Renan. It was drawn in Germany, or actually Switzerland. It's on the German-French-Swiss border in that area, and it's a very unique deck. For one, I love that the paper is so heavy. It's such a good quality heavy duty deck. I just really love it, and they slide so well. I love the finish. They just feel so good. Ignaz Krebs of Freiburg is the artist. Those are the backs. I love these backs. So Ignaz Cred, this was an early deck. I forget the date of it, but it was very, very early on, in the 1700s. And Piatnik, redesigned or redid this. It looks very much like a facsimile, actually. But I'm showing you backwards. Hold on. Take that back. Yeah, and it's really a cool deck. I really, really like it. And again, it's a unique Tarot de Marseille because it's from an area that's not in France, too much. I mean, it's on the border, but it's created by a person of German descent, and it's very different if you look at it. Love that moon card. Yeah, there's something like organic about this or something. It's like it's rustic. It's a rustic kind of old-fashioned deck. It's something I used to always read with a lot, and I haven't really pulled it out much lately. But it was one of my favorites in the beginning, and I think it just adds something. And when this came out in the 80s, there weren't many historic Tarot de Marseille, at least in the United States, around that I know of. Now, you have to mention to Osvaldo Menegazzi. I don't have any of his decks out today. I don't own any of his Marseilles, really. He's more of an Italian card maker. But, he, in this time period, I'm sure he had like a lot of cool historic decks around. So I don't want to say it was the only, but he's more of an indie creator anyway. And a few others, by the way. So next, I want to show you, I want to show you the Le Veritable. This was printed in 1996 by Chris Hadar. This is really another one that's one of my favorite decks, but it's in that, I probably should have showed you this after I showed you the Grimaud, in sort of with that little cluster of decks, because this is very much in that same kind of pattern, Might as well do it the way I did everything else. So there we got Chris Hadar, 1996. I know almost nothing about this deck. This is a first edition. It's still in print. I know that the new version is quite pricey. It's like $50-something, and it's very glossy cardstock, but it is still available. This is a first edition, which they're a little more on the rare side. But again, I really like this deck. I like the colors of it. Very, very Grimaud, So it's just a part of that, when you think Tarot de Marseille, this pattern is iconic, So this is what became to be known as and it was a very Convert kind of based thing. And people have gotten away from that now, because Convert used to be, which you have like a type 1 devil there. Convert was very much the like the standard in a lot of ways, and even for the next deck I'm going to show you, which is going to go into that. Okay, so I'm just going to show you the pips. It's very, very Grimaud. In fact, I'm going to show you one more, and then I'm going to get into the other one. So I'm going to pull these two out together, actually, because this is sort of should be mentioned sort of together. Okay, so Jodorowsky, he created this deck, and it was a really popular deck. It's very colorful and very, very beautiful. It's one of my favorite decks, and I use it very often. I even have a mini, which is really, really cute, and I love it. Okay, so Jodorowsky made this deck, and it's very much very similar, but this is more of a hybrid, I think. In fact, when I see the last deck I want to show you, which is Pablo Robledo's Marseille, it reminds me of that a lot. I don't have this in order, I'm sorry. But you know, it's very similar to the Grimaud, but not quite. You know, very clear images, a lot bigger. Like the smaller borders, they feel bigger to me. I don't know the characters, and I love the colors. It's really just a posh deck. And Jodorowsky is very, very like well known among certain people. So he's kind of a divisive figure. People either love him or hate him, it seems like. I guess I'm one of the rare people that's in between. I never read any of his books. I'm not like a fan, like a super, I don't know anything about his philosophy that much. I love that magician. I mean, is that not beautiful? Look at that. That's amazing, those colors. I really, really love this deck. I'm going to keep this deck out for a minute because, so that's Jodorowsky. Yeah, I was just saying, I didn't read any of his books, but the deck I just absolutely love. So then comes Yoav Ben-Dov. This was my very first Tarot de Marseille. I saw this on Tom Benjamin's channel, and I think he showed the Jodorowsky too, but I decided to get the CBD as if I was only going to buy one deck, you know. So that's Yoav Ben-Dov, and Ben-Dov, that was the first Tarot de Marseille book I read, his book. And he set out to create this deck because he wanted to go back, like I was mentioning earlier, you know, Convert was kind of the standard. He wanted to be like Convert to a T, basically. So he hired an artist to redraw the Nicolas Convert. And that's what happened. That's what he did. And so it's very, very, it's drawn work. It's drawn line work. It's actually hand drawn. So it's not block printed. It doesn't have that block printed feel or look to it, really. It has more of a hand drawn look to it. I mean, you can tell. Most people probably don't notice that, but it's something I can tell, you know. But it's historically accurate in terms of the Nicolas Convert. It's a part of that. It's more in line with Nicolas Convert than any of the decks that I've shown so far. You know, in fact, this is considered a Convert by many, but it is redrawn. You know, and a lot of decks are redrawn now, like the line work. But you know, with computer graphics, it's a lot easier to match the lines if you're good with computer graphics. But this was hand drawn by an artist. But I really like Yoav Ben-Dov. By the way, these are the backs. I like Ben-Dov. His book was great. He was a very likable character. He was a very smart guy, but he was sort of a paradox because he was like, part of him was very scientific. You know, he was a chemist or mathematician of some sort, very pro science, and the other side of him was very, very woo. But he was, an Israeli professor or something, but his books was just amazing. And this is a deck that will always be special to me because it was my first Tarot de Marseille, and I recommend it for people just getting into tarot. It's a great deck to start off with because it is based on the historic pattern of Nicolas Convert, but it's also cool and modern in a way. All right, so my last deck that I'm going to show you is also a favorite of mine, and it's really great. And this is almost kind of this is the 11th deck, and it's sort of like, I'm not sure if this really qualifies as a mass market deck or not, but it's probably technically indie, so I'll throw that out there. But this is Pablo Robledo's Marseille. And I just think this is amazing. It's not a historic recreation. It's a hybrid. You know, it's his tarot deck. It's a couple of decks kind of combined, his own method. Reminds me a lot of the Jodorowsky. In fact, you know, it looks a lot like the Jodorowsky. And it also reminds me of, there's another deck put out by the Eves. I forget the minis coming out this year. What is that called? You know what I'm talking about. the Millennium, Tarot Millennium. But I just love this deck because it's small, like Tarot Classic, you know, that Tarot Classic size. It has this kind of aged paper look, which is cool. You know, it works for this deck, I should say. It's not my favorite, but for this deck and this color palette, it definitely works. Let me show you the backs. These are the backs, which are very, very beautiful. So Pablo Robledo in 2011. And it's just stunning. It's a stunning Marseille deck. Now, this was introduced to me by a couple of friends. My friend Mendy, really. And she probably got it from Masha, but Musings by Masha, so the Artistry Tarot and Musings by Masha. Giving them a shout out for this because I didn't really know much about Tarot de Marseille before I met them. They were really, I learned so much from them. And, you know, I kind of looked up to them a lot because I really was, I could see their love for history. And as a student of history myself, I just became interested in TDM through them, for watching their videos, and they sort of opened up this whole world to me. I would say them two, and then Tom Benjamin. So that's one of the cooler, I mean, that's such a cool devil. But yeah, this is Mendy's, my friend Mendy's favorite. And I'm glad to have it. I actually bought the most recent edition of this, and it was a disappointment. It was nice in that it came with a book, but the book was like really not even that important. But the cardstock was nowhere near this card quality. This card quality is just so much better. And I actually sold that deck. I passed it along to somebody who you know, wanted it. It was brand new, unused, and I passed it along because I just had no use for it. Well, anyway, I obviously better clean this mess up because I have all these decks everywhere, and I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found it helpful. I would love to hear from you if if you heard a part of something I said you don't agree with, or you like what I said, please leave a comment below. I would love to hear from you if you have any questions or comments or whatever. And until next time, thanks for stopping by. Love and peace. Bye-bye.